I gotta get more organized in my barn, and I think the number one thing I can do towards that is build a big workbench against this wall here. I can definitely be a scatterbrained person at times, and a little time spent organizing goes a long ways for me. In our farm shop, we have a built-in workbench along one of the walls, and I think it's kind of the inspiration for this project. I've always really liked the functionality of it, with a nice big bench top to work on, and lots of storage underneath. I spent a lot of time when I was younger working at it, and I'm looking forward to having a similar setup here in the barn, with some improvements, of course. Man, junk piles up so quick. This was actually the day before we flew to Ireland to spend Christmas break with my in-laws, and I was racing to get the measurements into my computer so I could work on the bench design while I was over there. What I'm thinking is a metal frame made out of 1.5-inch square tubing, with wooden sides and drawers built into it. The center of the workbench will be built around a 6-foot wide tool cabinet, which will slide into a tight-fitting enclosure. And there'll be some more drawers and 2 sections of cabinets with doors for additional storage. I want a 3-inch thick wood worktop made from 4x6 beams, which I think I'll have to do in 2 separate pieces since the bench will be 22 feet long. I found that based on the project I'm working on, sometimes it's really nice to have a hard metal surface to work on like my welding table, and other times it's nice working on a wood surface, which is softer and warmer. I'm really looking forward to having the option of both going forward in the barn. With my design finalized, I made a haul to the metal supplier and bought the tubing for the frame. I needed to remove the metal siding against the wall, which reveals the even bigger mess I have in this back room, which I'm also hoping I can get more organized with the additional storage in the workbench. One thing I really wanted to do when designing the workbench is set the height of it at the same height as my welding table, and then if I have a really long piece I can set it across and it'll match up over there. So I think what I'm going to do is use the laser level and match the height of the table and draw a line all the way around on the framing in the back. This line will be the top of the bench top, so I've measured down 3 inches for the thickness of the wood and then another 1.5 inches for the thickness of the square tubing, where I nailed a temporary 1x to build the metal frame off of. Metal comes in 20-foot lengths, and I wanted the top rail of the cabinet face frame to be one solid piece that ran the whole length of the cabinet, which means I needed to weld 2 pieces together end to end. This is a great example of when it'd be nice to have the ability to set a long piece across to the workbench at the same height, if I had it. Most of the face frame I could weld together on the welding table. I worked hard to keep everything as accurate and as square as possible, using clamps to hold everything in place while I welded it. It was awkward and heavy, but I got it moved over into place and set up on a spacer block that I cut to the right height and fastened to the framing of the wall on the one end. From there, I used the laser level again to set the rest of the height. One thing that's definitely going to make this project a little more difficult is the floor is very unlevel, which is why I wanted to get the face frame set in place before I measured and cut the 2 legs that will sit on the concrete on either side of the tool chest. To plumb up the face, I cut a few boards to the right length to push it out at the top.
One thing I've started doing on all my miter cuts that's really helped me a lot is like on this one, I want miters on both sides and I want it to be 6 inches long. And so instead of just measuring across the top and marking 6 inches, what I'll do is chase the line around the side of the tubing with my speed square, and then I can mark the miter itself. I used to just mark the long side and try to look around the corner to line up with the blade of the saw, and it just wasn't very accurate. So now having the miter marked, it's a lot more accurate for me. I don't know, maybe that's common sense that most people do, but it still took me a while to learn it, so I thought I'd mention it.
On the farm shop workbench, there are 2 power receptacles on the front of it that get used a ton because it's really nice when you're using grinders and other corded tools to have the cords out of the way and not across the bench top. But I also wanted to minimize the amount of space lost to these plugs, so I'm going to have them fit in between the 2 small upper drawers. I'm not sure I've seen this done before, and I thought it'd be a fun challenge to figure out how to make it work. I welded together 3 pieces of the same square tubing, so it had the same radius on the outside corners as the rest of the cabinet frame. And then I cut out the backside with the plasma cutter. I filled in the face of it with the plate I cut and blended it all together. I marked the size of the opening I needed for the electrical box and cut it out.
These are old work boxes, which means that instead of fastening to the stud in the wall, they have these little tabs that suck down on the wall material, like the drywall or whatever it is you have. And I think they'll tighten down enough to fasten to the metal here. One thing I'm not sure about is if when I'm wiring in these plugs, if I should ground the metal frame as well. Be pretty easy to do, but I'm just not sure if that's the right thing to do or not. So if there are any electricians watching, let me know. I'd appreciate it.
I cut some corner gussets that I can bolt through to fasten down the wood bench top from the underside.
Been meaning to do this for years now. I don't know why it took me so long. I love this welder, but I hate this little flip out door. It's really flimsy and a piece of junk, and that's where the settings are stored, so it'd be nice having it right there on the front.
I continued to weld in pieces, filling out the rest of the frame. Again, with the floor and the back wall being so uneven, I thought it was best to measure and cut each piece individually to length. I know it would be much more typical to build a cabinet square and away from the wall, and then when it's set in place, it would be shimmed as needed to fill in the gaps. But for this, I wanted all the metal legs to sit directly in the concrete, since I think it's going to be really heavy and it's going to take some abuse over the years. I built a frame that the toolbox will sit on top of.
I'm always nervous about sparks and hot slag in the barn here, and I thought especially underneath the workbench here, it'd be really important to get it closed off tight. But the floor is so uneven, I think what I gotta do is mark it and then cut it out by hand, so it's a nice tight fit there.
I also welded on some feet that I can anchor the cabinet down to the concrete with. One of the last things I needed to weld onto the frame were a bunch of tabs that I can screw through and fasten the plywood to. Something I didn't really think about when I had this idea for the power plug in between the upper drawers was that I also somehow needed to enclose the sides with wood for the drawer sides to attach to, which meant I needed to make a box that matched that width. I'm using 3/4 inch plywood, so I needed to double it to match the thickness of the metal frame where the drawer slides will be installed. I used a block to set the tabs at the right depth to be flush with one side of the metal frame. For all the plywood on this project, I went with a product called Tiger Ply Edge, since it's still kind of hard to get Baltic birch around here. Man, it's expensive stuff, but it seems like really high quality. It's nice to work with.
Alright, I think I got all the little metal tabs welded on and the plywood installed on the bottoms and the sides of the cabinets. So what I'm going to do next is remove the wood, get it out of there, and pull the frame away from the wall and flip it over so I can weld on the bottom and finish up a couple little things I have left on it. But this thing should be ready to head into the powder coaters tomorrow. Should be a big step. excited for that.
Frame was getting pretty heavy and a little unwieldy. Looked like a real hodgepodge of a thing welded together. I'm not sure anybody driving by me on the freeway seeing it on the back of the truck thought, that's a Workbench cabinet right there. But hey, it's custom, and that's what I like.